The first thing I saw was the red and blue flicker, painting the trunks of the longleaf pines in flashes of electric blood. A sheriff's deputy, a kid no older than my own son would have been, stood on the soggy earth that used to be my front yard. He held a crisp, white envelope out to me, his knuckles pale. The paper was bone dry, a stark contrast to the thick, humid South Carolina air that felt like breathing through a wet sponge. The smell of exposed pluff mud and dying algae was a thick, gagging perfume that clung to everything. He wouldn't make eye contact. His gaze was fixed over my shoulder at the wasteland I had created, where just 6 months ago the shimmering expanse of Heron Lake reflected the bruised twilight sky. There was now a sprawling, pock-marked basin of mud and muck. It looked like a giant's bathtub after the plug had been pulled. Stranded on the far side, their million-dollar boat docks leading to nothing but a 10-foot drop to cracked earth, were the pristine, beige McMansions of the Heron Lake estates. Their precious $4 million resort community now overlooked a crater. The deputy cleared his throat, the sound swallowed by the chirping of 1,000 frantic crickets. "Final notice of seizure, Mr. Callahan," he mumbled, forcing the envelope into my hand. "For willful destruction of community assets. You really went and did it." I didn't look at the legal jargon. I looked at him, then back at the skeletal remains of the old spillway gate on my property, the one I'd opened 2 nights ago. A cold, quiet satisfaction, as solid and heavy as a river stone, settled in my gut. They had started an illegal war. I had just finished it. Where are you watching from? Comment your city below. I want to see just how far the tentacles of these corrupt HOAs really reach. This isn't just my story. It's a warning. It all started with the bridge. 6 months earlier, the air was sweet with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut lumber. The July sun beat down on my neck, and the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of my hammer was the only sound, save for the lazy drone of cicadas. I was replacing a few warped planks on the small wooden footbridge my grandfather built back in '78. It was a simple, sturdy thing, arching over a 20-foot channel of water to a tiny teardrop-shaped island in the middle of the lake. My island. My bridge. It was where my late wife, Sarah, used to sit with her watercolors, painting the egrets that stalked the shallows. The feel of the sun-warmed pine under my calloused hands, the familiar heft of the hammer. It was my church, my therapy. That's when I heard it. A high-pitched electric whine, like a giant mosquito with a transmission problem. A pristine, white golf cart, silent as a shark, rolled to a stop at the edge of my property line. At the wheel was Brenda Van Zant, HOA president, 50-something, with hair sprayed into a blonde helmet that could deflect small arms fire, and a pastel linen pantsuit that probably cost more than my property taxes. Her face was a mask of polite, condescending concern. "Mr. Callahan," she called out, her voice as crisp as a freshly printed dollar bill. She didn't get out of the cart. "Lovely afternoon for construction." I straightened up, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my glove. "Just maintenance, Brenda. Keeping the old place standing." Her eyes, hidden behind sunglasses the size of dinner plates, scanned the bridge. A faint, almost imperceptible curl formed on her lip. "Our architectural review committee doesn't have a record of this structure being approved. According to Covenant 714, all external modifications, including but not limited to decks, docks, and crossings, require board approval." The air, which a moment before had felt warm and comforting, now felt heavy, charged. "This bridge is older than your HOA, Brenda. It's on my property, connecting 2 parts of my property. My grandfather built it with his own 2 hands. "Be that as it may," she said, the smile never reaching her eyes. "It's an eyesore. The unweatherproof timber is not in harmony with the community's aesthetic standards. You'll be receiving a formal notice. We'll need you to submit a removal plan within 30 days. She put the cart in reverse. The electric whine starting up again. Have a blessed day. I watched her disappear down the gravel path, leaving behind only the faint scent of her expensive perfume and a simmering rage in my chest. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, you're going to absolutely love how this story ends. So stick with me. The letter arrived 3 days later. It was printed on thick, creamy cardstock. The Heron Lake Estates HOA, embossed at the top in elegant gold foil. It felt less like a notice and more like a royal decree. It cited Covenant 714, just as she'd said, and formally demanded the unauthorized crossing be removed. I read it, snorted, and tossed it onto the pile of junk mail on my kitchen counter. My property deed was signed and sealed in 1965. Their HOA was incorporated in 2008. They could pound sand. A week later, a second envelope arrived. Same creamy cardstock. This one was a notice of violation with a fine, $50. And $50 more for every day the bridge remained. It was a declaration of war disguised in calligraphy. My blood began to simmer. This wasn't about a bridge, it was about control. My property, a sprawling 10-acre holdout of old Florida. Pines and tangled oaks was the one piece of the lakeshore they didn't own. I was a toothache they couldn't fix. That night, I didn't sleep. I went into my dad's old study, the air thick with the smell of old paper and leather. I dug out the heavy metal lockbox from the back of his closet. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the original survey maps and the deed my grandfather signed. I spent hours under the glow of a desk lamp, the rustle of brittle paper the only sound, tracing the property lines with my finger. And then I found it. It wasn't buried in legalese. It was a simple, powerful concept I remembered from my time. In the Army Corps of Engineers, when we had to deal with building infrastructure around existing waterways. It's called riparian rights. It's a system of water law that gives the owner of land bordering a body of water the right to make reasonable use of that water. Critically, these rights are attached to the land itself, not the owner. And in most states, with a history like South Carolina's, they are considered a fundamental property right that often predates and supersedes private agreements like HOA covenants. My grandfather's deed didn't just give him the land, it gave him rights to the lake his land touched, including the right to build a dock, a pier, or a small bridge to access his own island. Brenda's Covenant 714 was, legally speaking, toilet paper. The next HOA meeting was in a soulless beige community clubhouse that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the 20 or so residents in attendance. Brenda sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by her two bored cronies, a nervous-looking accountant named Dale and a woman who looked like she judged bake sales for a living. When my turn came, I walked to the front, the original deed, in a protective plastic sleeve. My voice was calm, steady. I explained that my property was not legally subject to their architectural covenants regarding the lakeshore. I laid out the principle of riparian rights, citing the date on the deed, and the established legal precedent in the state. I wasn't asking for an exception. I was informing them of a fact. Brenda listened, a small, tight smile on her face. She didn't even look at the deed. When I was finished, she steepled her perfectly manicured fingers. "Thank you for your civics lesson, Mr. Callahan," she said, the words dripping with condescension. "It's very quaint. However, when you purchase a home in a covenant-controlled community, you agree to abide by all its rules. Our attorneys at Smith, Wexler, and Bain have assured us our covenants are ironclad. The fines stand. Next item on the agenda, a gavel." A tiny little toy gavel slammed down on the table. It was a thumbnail moment of pure, unadulterated arrogance. I stood there for a second, the dismissal stinging more than the fine. Her power lever wasn't just the HOA, it was her husband, a county commissioner who played golf with the senior partners at Smith, Wexler, and Bain. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a rigged game. What would you have done in my place? I want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. The next week, the harassment escalated. It was a Monday morning, the air still cool and misty over the lake. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I saw them. A white, unmarked van was parked on the community road just beyond my driveway. Two men in khaki pants and polo shirts got out carrying clipboards. They started walking my property line, taking pictures of the bridge. They didn't have the guts to step onto my land, but their presence was a violation, a clear attempt at intimidation. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of them, their van, their license plate. I'd learned in the military that you document everything. You build a case, piece by piece. Your enemy's arrogance is your best source of intelligence. Then came the whispers. I ran into my neighbor, old Mr. Abernathy, at the local hardware store. He was a good man, a retiree who'd lived on the lake for 20 years. He normally had a friendly word, but this time he looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot in the plumbing aisle. "Jack," he said, his voice low, "you need to be careful. Brenda's telling folks your bridge is structurally unsound. Says a kid could get hurt on it. She's saying it's lowering property values for the whole shoreline." He shook his head. "It's a lie, of course, but people are listening. She's got them scared about their investments." It was a classic smear campaign, a psychological operation. Isolate the target, turn the community against them, make them the villain. The sense of betrayal was a bitter taste in my mouth, metallic and sharp like old blood. This isn't just my fight. It's yours too. Tell me if your HOA has ever crossed the line and spread lies. The final straw came on a Thursday. I had to drive 2 hours to Charleston to pick up a special order part for my well pump. I was gone all day, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach the entire time. It was a primal instinct, the same feeling I'd get before a patrol, the sense that the world was slightly off kilter. I got back just as the sun was bleeding out below the horizon, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and purple. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me as soon as I turned onto my long gravel driveway, the sharp, clean scent of freshly splintered pine. It was a smell I associated with creation, with building. Now it smelled like death. My headlights cut through the twilight, and I saw it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The bridge was gone. Not disassembled, not neatly taken down. It was annihilated. A brutal pile of shattered lumber and twisted nails lay on my side of the bank. The support posts on the island side had been sawn through, the main span dragged ashore and hacked to pieces by a chainsaw. Tire tracks from a heavy-duty truck tore deep gouges in the soft earth, leading from the road right up to the water's edge. I killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering, wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. This was illegal. This was criminal trespass. This was destruction of private property. On one of the remaining posts, a bright orange piece of paper had been stapled. It fluttered in the evening breeze, a final, mocking insult. I got out of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. I walked over and ripped it from the post. It was another violation notice from the Heron Lake Estates HOA. The subject line read, "Remedy of Covenant Violation 714. They hadn't just destroyed my property. They were billing me for it. A coldness spread through my veins, extinguishing the hot flare of my anger and leaving something else in its place. Something quiet, patient, and methodical. It was a feeling I recognized from the darkest days of my deployment. It was the calm that comes when all the rules of engagement have been broken by the other side, and you are finally, completely, free to act. I looked at the pile of wood that was Sarah's favorite spot. I looked across the dark, silent water at the perfectly manicured lawns and the warm lights glowing in the windows of the multi-million-dollar homes. They thought they owned the lake. They thought their sham legal authority and their petty covenants gave them power. But they had forgotten one thing. One crucial piece of a puzzle they couldn't even see. Their entire paradise, their manicured lawns, their boat docks, their precious property values, it all depended on the water level of the lake, and I owned the dam. That cold, methodical rage was a language my body remembered. In the core of VI, engineers, you're taught to assess, not to feel. You survey the damage, you identify the tools used, you calculate the force required, and you reverse engineer the enemy's actions. Standing there in the deepening gloom, the air thick with the smell of pine sap and torn earth, I wasn't a grieving homeowner anymore. I was a combat engineer analyzing a hostile demolition site. The chainsaw cuts were sloppy, gouging deep into the wood. Too much force, not enough skill. The tire tracks were from a heavy-duty dual-axle truck, probably a contractor's vehicle. They'd done it in broad daylight, counting on their authority, counting on my absence. They left the violation notice as a calling card, a flag planted, on conquered territory. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, it was to the sheriff's department. The same young Deputy Miller arrived, his cruiser's tires crunching on my gravel. He looked at the wreckage, then at the orange notice I held out to him and sighed, the sound barely audible over the idling diesel engine. The scent of exhaust momentarily overpowered the smell of the ruined bridge. "I'll file the report. For destruction of property, Jack," he said, avoiding my eyes. "But I gotta be honest with you. Without a witness or a confession, this is going to be a tough one. They'll claim it was remedial action based on their covenants. It's a civil matter, they'll say." He gestured with his pen towards the distant glittering lights of Heron Lake Estates. "Those folks, they keep the county's lights on with their property taxes, and Brenda Van Zant's husband plays golf with the chief." He was telling me, in the kindest way he could, that I was on my own. The system was already compromised. I thanked him, watched him drive away, and then I went inside. The war had moved to a new phase, documentation and escalation. The first salvo from their side arrived the following Monday, delivered by a certified mail carrier who looked at me with pity. It was an invoice from the HOA for $2,500 for services rendered in the removal of the non-compliant structure. They had destroyed my property and were now charging me for the bullets. Attached was another notice. Due to my continued and willful defiance, the daily fines had been increased to $100. The paper felt slick and heavy in my hands, the ink a deep, mocking black. On Wednesday, the psychological warfare began. As I was checking my mailbox, Brenda's pristine white golf cart purred to a stop on the road. She didn't speak. She just sat there, sunglasses on, and stared. It was a silent, smug display of dominance, a predator circling its territory. The air was so humid I could feel the moisture bead on my skin, a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. She stayed for a full minute, then gave a slight satisfied nod and drove off. By Friday, I found them. 3 small wooden stakes, their tops painted a garish fluorescent orange, hammered about 5 feet inside my property line along the road. They were surveyor's stakes. It was a subtle, insidious message, a quiet threat questioning the very boundaries of my land. I yanked each one out of the soft earth, the splintery wood digging into my palm. It felt like I was pulling weeds that had been planted to choke the life out of my home. If you think HOAs should be held accountable for this kind of illegal harassment, type yes in the comments. Let's see how many of us there are. A direct assault was suicide. They had money, lawyers, and the county in their pocket. A good combat engineer never attacks a fortified position head-on. You find a weakness, you flank, you cut off their supply lines. Their supply line was the lake itself. The next morning, I drove to the Oak Haven County Records Office. The building was a relic from the 1930s, with cool marble floors and high, dusty ceilings. The air inside was a cocktail of smells, decaying paper, old leather bindings, and the faint, acidic scent of microfilm cleaner. This was my new battlefield. I wasn't just a property owner anymore. I was an opposition researcher. I greeted the clerk and headed for the archives, a windowless room in the basement. I wasn't looking for deeds this time. I was looking for the birth certificate of the lake itself. For 3 days, I lost myself in a sea of paper. I unrolled brittle, yellowed hydrological surveys from the 60s. I blew dust off of leather-bound volumes of Town Planning Commission minutes, the pages so fragile they threatened to turn to dust in my hands. I was looking for the original sin, the one detail they had overlooked in their quest for beige-colored dominance. On the 3rd day, a voice cut through my concentration. "You're either a very dedicated historian or a man in a whole heap of trouble." I looked up from a 1962 topographical map. A woman with a cloud of white hair and sharp, intelligent eyes peered at me over a pair of half-moon glasses. She was holding a stack of books and chewing on something that made her cheeks pucker. The faint, sweet and sour scent of lemon drops hung in the air around her. "A little of both, I suppose," I said. "Eleanor Vance," she said, extending a hand. "Retired head librarian, current town busybody. I see you found the Callahan Creek Reservoir project files. Nasty business that was. A lot of farmers got pushed around." She squinted at me. "You've got the Callahan jawline. You must be Frank's boy. Or grandson." "Grandson. Jack." Eleanor became my guide, my local intelligence asset. She knew the archives like the back of her hand and harbored a deep, simmering resentment for the nouveau riche carpetbaggers of Heron Lake Estates. She told me stories about Brenda Van Zant, how Brenda's family, the Prestons, used to own half the county before her grandfather gambled it all away on bad investments. "That woman isn't building a community," Eleanor whispered, her voice sharp over the rustle of paper. "She's trying to rebuild a fallen empire. She's terrified of looking poor. That's her weakness, Jack. She's all facade." It was with Eleanor's help that we found the cannonball that would blow a hole right through their ship. Buried in the minutes of a county commission meeting from October 1962 was a reference to a specific land use agreement. We cross-referenced it and found the document itself, filed not with the property deeds, but with the county water authority, easements. It was a thick, multi-page document, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper felt heavy, important. It was an easement and water rights agreement between my grandfather, Franklin Callahan, and Oak Haven County. When they dammed the creek to create the reservoir, the primary spillway and the original, manually operated sluice gate had to be built on the corner of my grandfather's property. In exchange for the easement and the land he lost to the rising water, the county granted him and his heirs in perpetuity sole legal ownership and operational control of that specific dam infrastructure. The language was explicit. For purposes of personal flood control and agricultural irrigation management. They had built a multi-million-dollar resort around a lake whose drain plug I legally held in the palm of my hand. The feeling was electric. It was better than victory. It was vindication. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Dave Chen, nearly fell out of his chair when I emailed him a scan of the agreement. A cease and desist letter was drafted and sent to the HOA and their high-priced legal team the next day. It was a checkmate move. I expected a full-throated apology, a check for the damages to my bridge, and for Brenda Van Zant to crawl back under her rock. That's when I learned a valuable lesson. A cornered rat doesn't surrender. It gets vicious. The response from Smith, Wexler, and Bain came a week later. It was a haymaker I never saw coming. They didn't dispute the 1962 agreement. They couldn't. Instead, they sidestepped it with brutal efficiency. The letter informed me that they had filed for, and been granted, a temporary injunction against me. They cited a vague but powerful piece of state legislation, the 1994 Wetlands Preservation Act. Their letter, oozing with faux environmental concern, claimed that in the decades since its creation, Heron Lake had evolved into a critical wetlands habitat. They even attached a hastily prepared ecological assessment that mentioned the supposed presence of the endangered marbled salamander. Therefore, any action to alter the established water level, they argued, would constitute a serious environmental crime, a felony under state law, resulting in hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and potential prison time. Brenda, using her husband's political connections, had weaponized the state's Environmental Protection Agency against me. My perfect weapon had been neutralized. The elation I felt just days before curdled into a cold, heavy dread in the pit of my stomach. What they did next almost made me lose everything, but it also gave me the opening I needed for the win of my life. The HOA was emboldened. They thought they had me completely trapped. The fines continued to pile up, the total now in the thousands. Then they broadened their attack. Mr. Abernathy received a violation notice for his bird feeder, which they claimed attracted nuisance wildlife. The young Miller family at the end of the cul-de-sac were ordered to remove their children's rainbow-colored swing set as it violated the community's approved earth tone color palette. It was a reign of terror in beige. Brenda was sending a message to the whole community. Defy me, and you will be crushed. I was Exhibit A for 2 weeks. I was paralyzed. I was outmaneuvered, outgunned, and facing the full weight of a state agency. The legal fees were mounting. The emotional toll was worse. The smell of the lake in the morning, once a comfort, now felt like a mockery. I sat on my porch, staring at the empty space where the bridge had been, feeling the fight drain out of me. One night, unable to sleep, I was back in my dad's study. The injunction and the 1962 water rights agreement spread out on the desk under the lamp's single pool of light. The words of the injunction swam in my head. Any action to alter the established water level of the protected wetland. The phrase snagged in my mind. A combat engineer doesn't. Just look at the enemy's fortifications. He studies the ground they're built on. Brenda's entire defense was built on the lie that the lake was a pristine, natural habitat. But I knew it wasn't. It was an artificial reservoir, nearly 60 years old. And 60-year-old reservoirs have problems. My mind flashed back to the dusty archives, to the piles of hydrological surveys I'd scanned onto a thumb drive. I plugged it into my laptop, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I pulled up the original 1962 survey maps and cross-referenced them with a recent satellite image and a county water quality report from 2 years ago that I'd downloaded. I started running numbers, comparing water depths, flow rates, and sediment levels. My training kicked in, and I saw what a layman, what Brenda's lawyers, would never see. For decades, sediment from Callahan Creek had been flowing into the reservoir and settling on the bottom. The original survey showed a maximum depth of 30 feet. The recent report showed it was now barely 18 feet in most places. The lake was slowly choking to death on 60 years of silt and agricultural runoff from the upstream farms. The high phosphorus levels mentioned in the report, combined with the low water flow, were creating the perfect conditions for algal blooms, the very thing that was making the lake smell like rotting vegetation in the late summer. Their pristine wetland was actually an aging, poorly maintained, and increasingly unhealthy retention pond. And then I saw it. On the original 1962 engineering blueprint for the dam, tucked away in the corner and almost faded into obscurity, was a notation my grandfather and the county engineers had insisted on. It wasn't the main spillway. It was a secondary low-level outlet, designed for a specific purpose. The label read, Emergency Desilting and Drainage Conduit. It was a kill switch, a back door, an engineered solution to the exact problem the lake was now facing. And under the 1962 agreement, I controlled it. The injunction prevented me from altering the water level for my own purposes. But what if I wasn't? What if I was saving the environment from them? A slow smile spread across my face. Brenda had handed me a sword, thinking it had no blade. She was wrong. She'd just told me exactly where to strike. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. It was almost midnight, but I didn't care. "Dave," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's Jack Callahan. I need you to file a petition with the state EPA first thing in the morning. Forget the injunction. We're going on offense." "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "On the grounds of environmental necessity," I said, looking at the faded blueprint. "The HOA's negligence is killing the lake. The sediment levels are critical. I have a legal right, and now a legal duty, to perform emergency maintenance. I have to drain it before it becomes a toxic swamp." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "I'm going to use their own weapon against them, and I'm going to do it by the book. The first move in a siege isn't an attack. It's a repositioning of forces to create an undeniable strategic advantage. My lawyer, Dave Chen, filed the petition with the state EPA and the County Water Authority not as a request, but as a formal notification. We weren't asking for permission. We were informing them of our legal obligation. The filing was a work of art, a masterpiece of tactical legalese. It included the original 1962 easement agreement, highlighting my role as the legal steward of the dam's infrastructure. It included the damming county water quality reports. It included a multi-page remediation plan I had written myself, complete, with flow rate calculations, sediment displacement projections, and a timeline. The plan's title was Emergency Ecological Restoration of the Callahan Creek Reservoir. We had reframed the entire conflict. I wasn't the disgruntled homeowner seeking revenge. I was a concerned citizen, exercising my long-established property rights to save the local ecosystem from the consequences of the HOA's neglect. The scent of Brenda's defeat was already in the air, sharp and metallic like ozone before a lightning strike. Brenda and her legal team at Smith, Wexler, and Bain were completely blindsided. Their injunction, their endangered salamander, their entire environmental argument had been turned into a weapon pointed directly at their own heads. They couldn't object to the draining without officially arguing in favor of maintaining a polluted, silt-choked body of water. They filed frantic motions for a temporary stay, claiming my data was flawed and my plan was reckless. But it was too late. I had the history, the science, and the law on my side. A circuit court judge, an old-timer who clearly had no love for frivolous lawsuits, reviewed the case. He denied their motion and granted me a 72-hour window, beginning Friday at sundown, to carry out the necessary remediation. The official court document felt as heavy and significant as a medal in my hand. Friday came with a heavy, bruised purple sky. A storm was brewing out over the Atlantic, and the air was thick and still. As dusk settled, I walked to the corner of my property, where the old concrete dam structure was half swallowed by overgrown grass. In the center of it was a large rust-red iron wheel, 4 feet in diameter, the sluice gate control. My grandfather had told me stories about it, how he'd have to open it during hurricane season to keep the creek from flooding his pastures before the lake was even there. I put my hands on it. The iron was cool and pitted under my palms. I pulled the 3-foot steel wrench from my shoulder, its weight familiar and comforting, and fitted it onto the central bolt. For a moment, I just stood there. The sound of the evening cicadas was a deafening electric hum. Across the water, the lights of the Heron Lake estates twinkled, serene and oblivious. They were sipping Chardonnay on their decks, admiring the sunset, completely unaware of the reckoning that was about to begin. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of damp earth and rain, and threw my entire body weight into turning the wrench. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The metal was fused by 60 years of rust and neglect. I pushed again, my muscles straining, my teeth gritted. A deep groaning shriek of tortured metal broke the evening quiet, a sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. The wheel moved, an inch, then another. A torrent of dark water, thick with mud and smelling of decay, exploded from the drainage conduit at the base of the dam, churning the creek below into a brown froth. I kept turning, foot by foot, until the gate was fully open. The steady, powerful roar of the draining lake was the sound of my answer, the sound of justice. The next morning, chaos erupted. I was woken by the sound of shouting carrying across the water. I made a cup of coffee and walked out onto my porch. The sight was apocalyptic. The water level had dropped a good 10 feet overnight. A wide, stinking ring of exposed mud, littered with old tires, beer cans, and forgotten fishing lures, now circled the entire lake. $1 million ski boats were listing awkwardly, their hulls buried in the muck. The pristine, floating docks now stood on spindly legs, leading to nowhere. The smell was biblical. It was the smell of secrets being exposed, of a pretty facade being ripped away to reveal the rot underneath. My phone started ringing. It was Mr. Abernathy. "Jack!" "My God, you did it," he said, his voice a mix of awe and glee. "They're losing their minds over here. Brenda's been running around in her bathrobe, screaming into her phone. They're calling an emergency meeting tonight at the clubhouse. You've got to be there." The clubhouse that night was a pressure cooker. The air, already thick with the swampy stench from outside, was now soured with the smell of panic, sweat, and cheap perfume. It was packed. Every resident was there, their faces a mixture of anger and fear. Brenda stood at the front, her face pale and strained beneath a perfect layer of makeup. Her husband, the commissioner, stood behind her, looking like a man who'd just watched his prize racehorse break its leg. When I walked in with Dave and Eleanor, a hush fell over the room. Every eye was on me. I saw Mr. Abernathy and the Miller family near the back, and they gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. Brenda gripped the lectern, her knuckles white. "This man," she began, her voice trembling with rage as she pointed a finger at me. "This vandal has single-handedly destroyed our community. He has jeopardized our property values, our safety, and our way of life. All because of a petty squabble over a rickety, unsafe bridge." She clicked a remote, and a picture of the half-drained, muddy lake filled a projector screen behind her. The crowd murmured in anger. When she finished her tirade, I walked calmly to the front. Dave set up our laptop. "Brenda's right about one thing," I said, my voice filling the tense silence. "This is about a bridge." I clicked the remote. A photo of Sarah, my late wife, appeared on the screen, smiling as she sat on the old bridge, her watercolors in her lap. "This was my wife's favorite place on earth, and your HOA destroyed it illegally, in the middle of the day, and then had the audacity to send me a bill." Another click. The invoice for $2,500 appeared on the screen, next to a picture of the splintered lumber. I then put up the 1962 water rights agreement, highlighting the section giving me control of the dam. I put up the county water quality reports showing the phosphorus levels and the heavy metals from their golf course fertilizer runoff. "I didn't destroy your lake," I said, my voice hard and clear. "I exposed it. This isn't a pristine habitat. It's a neglected 60-year-old retention pond that your HOA has been treating as its private swimming pool while it slowly turns toxic. I didn't drain it for revenge. I am draining it to save it, exactly as my legal rights and, frankly, my moral duty demand." Then Mr. Abernathy stood up. "She fined me $200 for a bird feeder," he called out. Mrs. Miller stood. "She threatened to sue us if we didn't take down our children's swing set." Suddenly, the anger in the room found a new target. The murmurs turned into a roar of outrage, directed not at me, but at the woman at the lectern. Brenda's face crumpled. The facade of the powerful community leader dissolved, revealing the petty tyrant underneath. She saw she'd lost them. "This is my community," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I built this! You all signed the covenants! You have to follow my rules!" That was the opening Dave had been waiting for. He stepped forward, his presence calm and authoritative. "Actually, Mrs. Van Zandt," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "that's not entirely true." He let the silence hang for a beat. Under South Carolina Code of Laws, Title 27, Chapter 30, also known as the Homeowners Association Act, an HOA can be administratively dissolved by a vote of the membership if the board is found to be acting in a manner that is illegal, fraudulent, or oppressive. The targeted harassment of residents, the levying of unconscionable fines, and the illegal destruction of private property would certainly qualify as oppressive. All it takes is a petition and a majority vote. He held up a thick sheaf of papers. Over the past few weeks, we have been speaking with your neighbors, and I am pleased to announce that we have here a petition signed by over 65% of the homeowners in Heron Lake Estates to formally dissolve this HOA for gross malfeasance. It was a nuclear bomb. The room erupted. Brenda stared at the petition, her mouth agape. Her face, a mask of carefully constructed superiority, shattered into a million pieces. The fear of losing her status, the one Eleanor had told me about, was now a public spectacle. In that moment, she was just a powerless, defeated woman who had lost everything. Her husband quietly took her by the arm and led her out of the room, through the gauntlet of their furious neighbors. The reign of terror was over. In the end, the HOA was dissolved. A simple, far less intrusive neighborhood committee was formed to handle road maintenance and garbage collection. Brenda and her husband sold their house 6 months later at a significant loss and moved away. The story of the HOA queen who got her lake drained became a local legend. The lake took months to refill, but as it did, it came back cleaner and healthier than it had been in decades. The desilting process had worked, and in the spring, with the help of Mr. Abernathy and a half-dozen other neighbors, I rebuilt the bridge. We used cedar this time, and we countersunk every screw. It was stronger, more beautiful, and built not by one man's hands, but by a community's. I'm standing on it now, the new wood warm under my bare feet. The scent of fresh cedar mixes with the clean, sweet smell of the lake water. The egrets are back, stalking through the reeds on the shore of my island. I rebuilt the bridge, but in the process, we rebuilt something more important. We took back our homes. We took back our peace. This fight wasn't just about my property. It was about the simple, fundamental principle that no one, not a bully, not a committee, not an HOA, has the right to extinguish the small things that give our lives meaning. Your story could be next. If you believe no one is above the law, hit that subscribe button, because we are going to expose every single one of these corrupt HOAs together. Share this story with someone who needs to see that it's possible to fight back and win. Comment your own HOA horror story below. We're in this together, and we will not be silenced.